The new Porsche GT3, it's incredible, but some technical problems bother me.
What do you mean? It has a 525 horsepower engine, goes from 0 to 100 in 3.2 seconds, and reaches 296 kilometers per hour.
It's not these kinds of technical problems that bother me.
What happens when a car built to win races becomes a symbol of empty, pathetic ostentation? That is the dilemma surrounding the Porsche 911 GT3 today. In the 1990s and 2000s, it was born as a raw response to a crisis within Porsche itself. Engineers versus executives, track versus office. The mission was clear: to save the brand's essence with a manual, loud, pure car made for those who sweat inside the helmet and not for those who sweat over choosing an Instagram caption. The GT3 was the last bastion of old-school Porsche, created for Nürburgring, not for cell phone screens. But time changed. Today, the same machine that humbled the green hell appears in the hands and photos of clueless influencers and untalented musicians who treat the car as a music video accessory or Instagram trophy. Dealerships require that you buy an SUV to deserve the sports car, while buyers argue over exotic paint colors as if they were choosing luxury bag leather. Paradoxically, the car remains imposing and spirited, but the world around it has rotted and changed its personality. What was born to prove courage and skill on track turned into a status symbol, hijacked by a culture that exchanged sweat at the wheel for digital filters. This is the story of how an automotive engineering icon was hijacked by hype and how car culture sold its soul for clicks. How fools destroyed the GT3. The good side. At the end of the 1990s, Porsche was experiencing one of the most delicate periods in its history. The prestige built over decades, from glorious days at Le Mans to records at Nürburgring, remained intact in the minds of enthusiasts. But the financial balance told another story. Asian competition was gaining strength, the transmission made exports too expensive, and the aging product line could no longer sustain sales momentum. For the first time in years, the risk of losing relevance in the global market felt tangible. The survival strategy was clear: launch high-volume models. The Boxster, introduced in 1996, was the first successful step. Then came the new generation of the 911, internally known as 996. It was an ambitious project that dared to break a tradition of more than 3 decades. The air-cooled engine would give way to a water-cooled block. This solution met emissions and noise norms, but also confronted Porsche with a cultural dilemma. For many purists, it meant a betrayal of the brand's essence. Inside the company, caution was the word. Every investment was carefully considered, and any project outside the main focus met resistance. It was in that environment that the competition department faced a challenge: keep Porsche connected to motorsport. The brand's history was inseparable from the tracks, and losing that connection would mean diluting the identity that had made the 911 an icon. Le Mans, Daytona, Nürburgring were more than wins. They were proof that engineering and passion could coexist. At the helm of the sports sector was Hartmut Christen, a meticulous engineer and racing enthusiast. He knew persuading the board to invest in a niche car would be a difficult battle, but he argued that without a product to keep the enthusiast customer base alive, the whole racing program risked becoming irrelevant. Christen proposed something bold, creating a road car capable of homologating competition versions for GT categories, preserving the bridge between track engineering and mass production. It would not only be a fast model, it would be a 911 designed from the beginning to serve as the basis for race cars. The starting point was the newly launched 996 generation, but to fulfill the proposal, a more powerful setup was not enough. A legitimate racing heart was needed. The solution came from the legendary prototype 962, a Le Mans winner and a reference in endurance racing. The engine, signed by Hans Mezger, was a robust 6-cylinder Boxster created to endure extreme strain for hours on end. For the GT3, it received water-cooled cylinder heads, new electronic management, and tuning for road use. while maintaining the prototype inherited architecture and durability. Mezger was not just any engineer, he was the man behind some of Porsche's most celebrated engines, including the V12 of the 917, the 6-cylinder of the 935, and the turbo engine supplied to McLaren in Formula 1, which delivered 3 world titles in the 1980s. His signature on the project guaranteed pedigree and legitimacy to the new coupe. The final result was a naturally aspirated 3.6-liter engine with 360 horsepower, paired with a 6-speed manual gearbox with ratios chosen to extract the maximum from tracks like Spa. The chassis received recalibrated suspension, firmer springs and dampers, larger ventilated disc brakes, lightweight wheels, and a functional aerodynamic package. The rear spoiler was not only imposing but also generated enough downforce for stability at high speeds. The redesigned front bumper helped cool the brakes and reduce drag. In 1999, the 911 GT3 debuted with immediate impact. It became the first road-going 911 to complete a full lap of the Green Hell in under 8 minutes, a feat at that time achieved by very few street cars and some far more expensive, limited production supercars. Priced at an average of $96,000, the GT3 was positioned as a relatively accessible alternative for elite performance. Porsche's plan was to sell just enough units to justify homologation for the track, but the market surprised everyone. Customers not only bought them, but used the car intensely. At the beginning of 2000, it was common to see GT3s at track days, often with visible tire wear, blue glowing discs from heat, and improvised setups in the pits. Specialized workshops reported an increase in heavy maintenance services for near-new cars, proof that they were used as intended at the limit. That delivery of performance also translated on track. Competition variants derived from the GT3 secured victories at Spa, in Porsche Super Cup, FIA GT, and the 24 Hours of Nürburgring, garnering podiums that reinforced the direct link between the road-going car and the prototypes defending the brand's colors. For many, that model represented the essence of what a Porsche should be, a car born to race but capable of taking you home at the end of the day. Behind the scenes, the creation of the GT3 also solidified a philosophy within the company. From that point on, Porsche began investing more in its GT department, developing not only model evolutions, but also an entire line focused on pure performance. The unexpected success gave Kristen and Mezger's team greater freedom to experiment and more influence on strategic decisions. It was born as a homologation tool but quickly became a reference in drivability, balance, and endurance. More importantly, it proved that there was still room and a market for a car made by and for people who truly love driving. That solid foundation paved the way for the natural evolution of the family and future challenges brought along with growing fame. The success of the 996 GT3 was more than a commercial victory. It was a proof of concept. Porsche successfully merged market viability with sporting relevance in a product that satisfied both track enthusiasts and the most demanding collectors. But inside the factory, nobody was fooled. The challenge now was to keep the momentum, evolve the car without losing the DNA that had enchanted purists. In 2003, the brand introduced the first RS version of this new lineage. The acronym, synonymous with Rennsport, carried historical weight and could not be used lightly. The 996 GT3 RS was a surgical evolution, 50 kilograms lighter thanks to polycarbonate rear windows and carbon fiber panels, plus reduced sound insulation. The suspension was recalibrated stiffer, gear ratios shortened, and aerodynamic tuning increased downforce at high speeds. It was, in essence, a race car registered for street use, and anyone at the wheel would feel it in the first meters. On track, the RS proved its worth. Competition variants such as the GT3 RSR shone in races like the 24 Hours of Le Mans and Nürburgring, winning class titles and bolstering the GT3 reputation as a reliable technical base for endurance racing. The Mezger engine, with legendary robustness, sustained marathon usage, something few competitors could claim at the time. Between 1999 and 2005, approximately 5,000 units of all GT versions of the 996 were produced, a number far above what Porsche had initially projected. Natural evolution arrived in 2006 with the 997 generation, more modern and visually closer to the classic lineage with the return of oval headlights, The new platform brought significant improvements. The GT3 of this era retained the Mezger 3.6-liter engine, but now with 415 horsepower and a redline of 8,400 RPM. The big novelty was the introduction of PASM, Porsche Active Suspension Management, allowing electronic adjustment of suspension firmness, adapting the car for road or track without compromising performance. Aerodynamics were refined too, generating twice the downforce compared to its predecessor, while brakes were larger and more efficient, with optional PCCB ceramic discs for those seeking maximum heat resistance. The total weight was 1,395 kilograms, proof Porsche still cared about keeping the GT3 agile and direct. Shortly thereafter came the GT3 RS in 2007, 44 kilograms lighter, wider body, and broader track. Suspension and gearbox tuning made it even more track-oriented without completely sacrificing road manners. At the same time, Porsche unveiled the 997 GT2, a turbocharged beast with 530 horsepower and supercar performance, bolstering the GT line's extreme aura. Despite the global financial crisis of 2008 impacting the automotive industry, Porsche continued to invest. In 2009, the 997.2 facelift introduced a new 3.8-liter Mezger engine with 435 horsepower, alongside improvements in electronic management, cooling system, and aerodynamics. The driving experience was sharper, but still preserved what many considered the purity of the GT3 manual transmission, hydraulic steering, and a naturally aspirated engine with instant response. In 2010, the RS 3.8 took the concept even further, with reduced weight and tuning so precise it became a reference for anyone seeking a track car with license plates. The generation's grand farewell came in 2011 when the GT3 RS 4.0 arrived with a 4-liter engine, 500 horsepower, 460 Newton-meters of torque, and a breathtaking weight-to-power ratio. Produced in only 600 units, it immediately became a collectible item and is still considered by many the pinnacle of the Mezger lineage. Although the 997 sold more than the 996, the numbers remained modest compared to Porsche's total volume. This kept the GT3 in a special tier, away from mass production, and more importantly, the culture around the model was still predominantly formed by genuine enthusiasts. Forums and discussion groups buzzed with technical chats about suspension setup, brake compound, and optimal tire pressures for each circuit. Resale value depended more on mechanical condition and usage history than rare colors or catalog options. Yet signs of change were already present. The rise of social media and Porsche's transformation into an aspirational luxury brand began attracting a different audience. Celebrities and public figures, even those with no connection to motorsport, began to see the GT3 as a status symbol, a display piece in garages and events, often with no intention of exploring its potential on the track. Purely aesthetic modifications, such as chrome wheels or flashy wraps, started appearing here and there, creating a real split between true enthusiasts and the ostentatious. This new dynamic was still a minority, but it signaled that the model was becoming less of a car and more of a soulless luxury item. The bad side. The arrival of the 991 generation in 2012 represented more than just a new chapter in the 911 story. It was a shift in philosophy. The car grew bigger, became more comfortable and refined, moving away from the mechanical rawness that had seduced enthusiasts for years. In the GT3, the changes were even more dramatic. For the first time, there was no manual gearbox option. The PDK dual clutch transmission, fast and efficient, became the only choice, and the iconic engine developed under Hans Mezger's leadership, the bedrock of the GT lineage, was left behind. In its place was an evolution of the 9A1 engine inherited from the Carrera, adapted for track intensity. The new setup delivered 469 horsepower, revved up to 8,250 RPM, and produced lap times that outperformed any previous GT3. But there was an emotional cost to that efficiency. Part of the audience started to see the model as too accessible, both in driving mode and purpose. It ceased to be a race car for the street and became, for many, a supercar for the rich, and only that. This change coincided with a broader transformation in the brand. Throughout the 2000s, Porsche repositioned itself from a niche manufacturer to a global luxury symbol. The Cayenne and later the Macan and Panamera opened doors to customers who previously had never considered the mark. The red and gold crest on the hood gained the same symbolic weight as high-fashion brand initials. While the 997.2 had sold just over 2,200 GT3 units, the 991 surpassed 6,500, a leap that reflected not only technical competence, but also the desire to own an expensive object. The typical buyer was no longer the doctor passionate about track days or the executive flying to Nürburgring on vacation. Now it included professional athletes, digital influencers, and investors who saw the GT3 as an asset, not a driving instrument. And then the problems began. In 2014, reports emerged of catastrophic engine failures. Internal investigations pointed to flawed connecting rod bolts, incapable of withstanding the flat six's extreme RPMs. Soon all 785 cars produced to that point were recalled and received new engines, along with an additional year of warranty. The quick response contained the initial crisis, but the reliability reputation built over decades took its first dent. 4 years later, at the end of the 991.1 life cycle, another issue surfaced: premature valve shim wear, causing engine breakdowns again. Porsche extended coverage to 10 years or 120,000 miles for all affected cars, an unprecedented measure for the brand. For some enthusiasts, the episode only confirmed that drifting away from purist philosophy came with a loss of mechanical rigor. Curiously, none of that slowed demand. On the contrary, every new special edition, such as the 2015 GT3 RS with its 4.0 engine and aggressive aero, found buyers even before being officially announced. But the purchase process was no longer just paying sticker price. It required building relationships with dealerships, owning other models from the brand, and often accepting surcharges of tens of thousands of dollars just to secure a spot in line. Porsche, intentionally or not, had adopted the same exclusivity playbook that had made Ferrari inaccessible to many, yet irresistible to others. By the end of this era, the GT3 was no longer just a high-performance car. It had become a passport to a social club where influence, status, and wealth spoke louder than the ability to push the traction limit out of a curve. To those who knew its origin, it was a symbol of how quickly a legend can change its meaning to stay alive. In 2016, the pressure from purists finally found resonance within Porsche's GT division. After years of listening to demands to bring back a manual transmission to a modern GT, the team led by Andreas Prüninger decided to create something special. It was not just about pleasing the most loyal fans, but also about proving that even with technological avalanches, there was still room for a 911 entirely devoted to driver pleasure, and thus the 911R was born. Based on the GT3 RS, the model shed the fixed rear wing and extreme aerodynamic elements. Instead, it featured a cleaner look, a 50-kilogram weight reduction, and a 6-speed manual gearbox mated to the 4-liter engine with 500 horsepower. It was the combination many had dreamed of, leading performance with genuine mechanical engagement. The problem was that only 991 units were produced, a number that from the start seemed designed to generate scarcity. The result was immediate. All units sold before journalists even got to drive the car. On the secondary market, values soared. Examples were listed for 2 to 3 times the list price, turning the 911R into a high-yield financial asset. For many, it ceased to be a car for driving and became a collectible, stored in climate-controlled garages and shown only at exclusive meets. This episode paved the way for a phenomenon that would radically change the relationship between enthusiasts and the GT3, the flipping trend. Buying a limited edition car, keeping it untouched, and reselling it quickly for profit became common practice. The success of the 911R proved that demand for rarity and exclusivity was as strong or stronger than demand for performance. Dealerships, sensing the potential profit not only from the initial sale, but also from fostering customers willing to spend more to get on priority lists, started screening buyers based on their purchase history. This new business model brought Porsche closer to strategies seen in other supercar brands, requiring buyers to purchase SUVs or less sought-after models before being invited to buy a special GT. On paper, it was a way to reward loyal customers. In practice, it created a filter favoring purchasing power and connections over true automotive passion. The impact on the GT3's culture was profound, whereas in previous generations it was common to see examples at track days, coated in brake rubber and worn through tires. A significant portion of the production now went straight to collectors or investors. Artificial appreciation fueled a cycle where the most desired car spent less time on track and more time idle, not due to lack of capability, but due to speculative value. It was like having the perfect girlfriend inside a glass case. The 911R, despite being an engineering triumph that honored the brand's legacy, also marked the consolidation of a new paradigm. GT cars were no longer just performance tools, but currency in the game of status and investment. And as would soon be clear, that game was just beginning. The 911R's cultural and financial impact was impossible to ignore. For Porsche, it became clear there was real demand for a modern GT with a manual transmission, not just as a limited edition. In 2017, that perception materialized with the launch of the 991.2 GT3, which brought back the 6-speed manual transmission as an option alongside the ever-popular PDK. It was not just a marketing gesture, but a direct response to purists' pressure, and a recognition that part of the GT3's identity rested in physical and mechanical involvement. Beyond the return of the shift lever, the 991.2 received an all-new 4-liter engine derived from the RS with 500 horsepower and revving up to 9,000 revolutions per minute. The sound and power delivery reinforced the model's visceral character, while enhancements in suspension, aerodynamics, and structural rigidity kept the GT3 the benchmark in balancing road usability and track performance. It was a car capable of cruising comfortably to the supermarket and then posting competitive lap times at any circuit in the world. The problem was that the market had already changed. Waitlists became long and were often limited to customers with significant purchase history, a reality at Porsche. The consequence was predictable. Even the manual version, more focused on driving pleasure than absolute lap times, became a target of intense speculation in the secondary market, and those who truly would use all that track-bred technology rarely got the chance. Shortly thereafter, the brand introduced the GT3 Touring, a variation without the large rear wing, aimed at those who wanted the GT3's mechanics and chassis in a more discreet, timeless format. It was a modern reinterpretation of the 911R spirit, but with regular production. Even with that less ostentatious proposal, touring examples started appearing for sale at much higher than list price, even before the first deliveries. With the brand's global expansion as an aspirational luxury icon, the GT3 ceased being just an enthusiast icon and became a passport to a select social club. Photos on social media, influencer events, music videos by untalented artists, and visually driven ads without automotive appeal began to define its image. The return of the manual gearbox and the excellence of the project proved that Porsche's DNA was still alive. Yet the way these cars were bought, resold, and displayed revealed a profound and perhaps irreversible shift. The model remains a car for driving, for those who appreciate speed on track, adrenaline rush circuits, and the pleasure of hearing an engine roar. But sadly, it is no longer used for that. Instead, it has turned into an item, almost like a Rolex or an expensive bag, an object to be stored and announced to a millionaire social circle that has a Porsche, rather than actively using something powerful from modern engineering called the GT3. If once the GT3 was synonymous with adrenaline, sweat, rubber, and limit, today it has become the password to enter a club where driving is secondary. The car survives, but the culture that created it is no longer behind the wheel, yet others survive too. Another example is the story of the Golf, which reinvented itself, pleasing and displeasing many, and still stirs controversy, both its early generations and the newer ones. I'll tell you more about its history in the video that just started on your screen. See you in 5 seconds.